What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime Officer Story People. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure you follow us on all of our social media. One link to a link tree will get you every place you need to go pertaining to the show. And like I always like to remind you, if you are someone or you know someone who feels like hurting themselves or someone else, please leave this episode and dial 988. It is the suicide prevention hotline. They will get you the help that you need. And in case no one else has told you this today, let me be the first one to tell you that I do need you to be here. There is nothing worth your life. All right, guys, how are you guys doing? Hope you're having a great summer so far. Sorry it's been so long, but I think I kind of alluded to the fact in my last episode that I did that I will probably be gone here and there. I am. That's why I have not promised any release dates. Thank you guys all for staying with me. I know it's been almost a month since you heard from me, but that time will dwindle now. But there's been a lot of things going on in the summertime. We're still out here looking for jobs and things of that nature. But your boy is going to be all right. You can believe that. All right. Well, today's case, I hesitated about doing this one. I know about the case. I've known about the cases that happened. I've known about it since a year ago. But I try to stay out of the ones that people like to look at me and go, oh, because you black, you want to talk on this. Well, I think that people that is black needs to talk on this for a number of reasons, and maybe not the reason that you think. But I'm going to do this case for you today. I'm going to give you all the particulars, and I'm going to keep you up to abreast on what's going on. And I'm also going to tell you my opinions as well as some of the dumbest comments that I've read about this case. You guys have probably all known it. You've probably all heard about it. It's all over the place. Today, we're going to talk about Karmelo Anthony's case. Right now, he is in trial day 3. And there's a lot of things that's going on with that case. So I'm going to handle this a little bit differently than some of the creators and people that I'm seeing actually doing this case. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm just not going to come out and just bash the bad parts about the case and tell you what I think is racism and call it all of that. I'm going to walk you through what's happened, at least in day 3. Day 1 and 2 was pretty much, I guess, non-eventful. I think the first day they picked the jury, which is all kind of controversial. We'll get into that. And I think the second day was actual testimony where some of the people that was at the tent did testify. And everybody said, oh, my gosh, that kills the self-defense theory. And I do have questions around that. But I'm going to keep you abreast. We're going to talk about the case. You'll learn about the particulars about the case. I'm also going to tell you what's going on right now in court. And then I'm going to tell you my 2 cents in this. Now, the one thing that I think is wrong off the bat is that the judge has ordered this case not to be televised. Now, let me show you how impaired the media actually is. The media can't go in with no cameras. They can have no phones. They can have no dictaphones. They can have no miniature tape recorders. I even think the guy from Court TV even said that to make sure that none of these things is happening, that the judge has everybody patted down on their way in. So the only thing that the media has inside this case right now, when they're going in trying to report to us, is their memory, a pen or pencil, and a notepad. That is all. So I do watch one specific channel that talks about this all the time because they're always there. But I wanted to let you know that I think that's a big mistake. Some of the biggest cases of our time has been televised. I think America needs to see the televised case. When you can see people, it tells us different things that's going on about this case. The body language alone speaks. But now that we don't have that, we got people speculating on what he is or how he was raised or what the Metcalfs did and all of this kind of stuff. Now, like I said, some of the biggest cases of our time has been televised. I give you 2. O.J. Simpson was one of the biggest cases of the century when it came out. Televised. Casey Anthony, televised. This one definitely should be televised, if for no other reason, but for the reasons surrounding the things that people are saying about racism and so on and so forth and things of that nature. But it's not. So we're going off of reports from people that's been inside of the courtroom, what they've seen and what they witnessed. That's all we got, okay? So I will bring you up to breast on all of that. And then I'll tell you where I think the mistakes is made. I'll tell you what I think possibly could happen. And I'm going to be the first one to tell you if Karmelo Anthony did this, then he needs to go to jail. I'm not saying that he shouldn't, but let's go ahead and get into this case and let's start breaking this down. So at the center of this case, as you probably know, there are two young men at the center of this case. Austin Metcalf, who was a 17-year-old student athlete who lost his life at the high school track meet that day. And then we have Karmelo Anthony, who was also a teenager at the time, and he is now standing trial for murder. Now, the one thing I want to say, in case I forgot to write this down, because I'm reading these comments, oh, death penalty, you need to hang him. Okay, Karmelo Anthony cannot, let me repeat, cannot receive the death penalty. He also cannot receive life without the possibility of parole, because at the time of the crime, Karmelo Anthony was a juvenile. I believe he also was 17. That means even if it took 5 years for this case to complete, Karmelo Anthony cannot do life in prison without the possibility of parole and cannot be put on death row, because at the time of the crime, he was a juvenile. I want to point that out so people can stop yelling he needs to be hung or put on death row. And I think they even covered that at the beginning of this case. Now, one family is grieving a son who will never come home. Another family is watching their son face the possibility of losing his future to prison. And this is not the story. It doesn't have clean edges, folks. It's going to be all kinds of jagged. So this is also not a case that should be reduced to hashtags. It should not be political talking points, or it should not be online comment sections. And yet that is exactly what is happening in this case right now. See, the Karmelo Anthony case has become more than a criminal trial. It has become a mirror, and that mirror reflects back at us, and it's very uncomfortable. So it reflects grief, it reflects anger, it reflects fear, it reflects racism, and it reflects how quickly the public can decide what happened before a jury has finished hearing the evidence. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through what is known so far, what has come out through the trial through day 3 itself, the self-defense argument, the prosecution's theory, and the racial tension surrounding the case. And I want to be clear at this part, right here from the start. And I think I said it already, but I wrote it down to say it again. Austin Metcalf deserves justice. Karmelo Anthony deserves a fair trial. Those two statements can and must exist together. Now, the question I want you to ask yourself as I continue is, at the current state of the trial that Karmelo Anthony has, can he receive a fair trial? That's the question I want you to ask yourself, and keep this in the back of your mind, and I'll sum that up as we get to the end of this. So let's talk about the incident. On April 2nd, 2025, a high school track meet was taking place at, I'm going to mess this up probably, but Kendall Stadium in Frisco, Texas. It was raining that day. Students were gathering under tents trying to stay dry, and in the middle of what should have been an ordinary school athletic event, a confrontation began under one of those tents. Karmelo Anthony, a student from Frisco Centennial High School, ended up under a tent associated with Memorial High School. And Austin Metcalf, a 17-year-old Memorial student and athlete, was under that tent as well. So was his twin brother, Hunter, along with other students. According to the testimony and reporting from the trial, students under the tent told Anthony to leave. But what happened next is at the center of this case. The prosecution argues that Anthony refused to leave, escalated the confrontation, placed his hand in his backpack, made threatening statements, and ultimately stabbed Austin Metcalf in the chest after Austin pushed or touched him. I want you to keep that statement right there in mind, because I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna put some emphasis on this and why I say everybody wasn't there. But I want you to pay attention again. Austin Metcalf, he stabbed him in the chest after Austin pushed or touched him. I just want you to keep that, put that in the database. The defense argues that Anthony was seeking shelter from the rain, was confronted by several athletes, was physically touched first, and acted out of fear and what they say was self-defense. Those two versions are now being tested in court. And the law does not simply ask whether Anthony stabbed Austin Metcalf. By all accounts, that part, there's no argument. We already know that because Karmelo already said that he did it. He told the cops that at the time that they arrested him. He never tried to deny that. But the central question is whether that stabbing was murder or whether it was legally justified as self-defense. Now, let's talk a little bit about the first days of trial. So by trial day 3, the prosecution had called several witnesses, including students who were near or under the tent during the confrontation. Their testimony has been important because they are helping the jury understand the moments before the stabbing. Some witnesses have testified that Anthony was asked to leave more than once. Some described him as refusing to leave. Some said he made comments that sounded threatening. Some testified that he had his hand in his backpack before the stabbing. The prosecution wants jurors to see a pattern. They want the jury to see Anthony as someone who was not simply standing in the rain, but someone who was refusing to leave a place where he had been told he did not belong, escalating the encounter and preparing for violence. But the defense has used cross-examination to focus on something else. Austin Metcalf, according to testimony, did make physical contact with Anthony. Message, I want you to keep that in mind. Austin Metcalf, according to testimony. Now, this is testimony from his own camp, from his own people. Remember, the prosecution now has the floor. The defense hasn't said anything yet. So, by their own testimony, they say Metcalf did put hands on him. Also, witnesses have acknowledged that Austin pushed Anthony or put hands on him in some way. You got to keep that in mind. Now, that matters. And it matters because self-defense cases often turn on who used force first, what kind of force was used, and whether the response was reasonable. For the defense, Austin's physical contact is central. For the prosecution, the physical contact does not justify a deadly response. That is where the courtroom battle is unfolding. Now, let's go back and I got some things to say about it. Remember I said I had questions. I got questions for both Metcalf and Anthony here. The first question I have for Metcalf and crew is this. What happened to sportsmanship? You're at a meet. I understand you from two rival schools, but why did you ask him to leave and he just ducked up under the rain? According to everything I've read and seen and what I wrote down here, it wasn't even he was doing anything. He just ducked up underneath the tent. And they came up with, you gotta go, you gotta leave. Okay, cool. My question is, what happened after that? See, reports say that Anthony said, well, make me or try me or whatever the case was, and they proceeded to go to put hands on him. Now, let me tell you exactly what I have watched and read and give you the context into this so that you understand. Supposedly in the courtroom, from one of the reporters I watched, it had been said that Karmelo came into the tent. He was asked to leave. Supposedly Karmelo said, make me or try me or one of those things, in which they started moving towards him. And at this time, Karmelo put his hand in his bag. From testimony on the Metcalf side, from the prosecution side, they even said that his hand was in the bag, but because of where they live, they didn't really take it seriously. They didn't really think that he had anything in his bag. So Metcalf proceeded to go up and to touch him or to push him, in which time, I guess it happened more than once, because according to Karmelo Anthony, he told the cops when he got apprehended that they put hands on him and he told him not to. So from there, I'm assuming, have to assume because we wasn't there, that Austin Metcalf tried to touch or push him more than once. And on that second time when he pushed him, now nobody is reporting if it was a hard push, a soft push, but in self-defense, people, it doesn't matter what kind of a push that it is. If he touched him and he felt like his life was in danger, you can defend yourself. So at this point, Karmelo Anthony, I guess, proceeded to pull out his knife, stab Metcalf, and took off. Now, I know a little bit something about these self-defense cases. Or did you guys not hear the episode I did when I had to deal with my foolish neighbor next door to me? And and that same thing came up. I pulled my phone out to prevent that. And I did tell him directly on camera, if you touch me, I'm dropping you. Because of the fact that he was coming towards me like he wanted to put his hands on me. I had the aid of a camera. So that aids to my first question of the day. You got all these teenagers up underneath the tent. They're all telling you what the recount is, or what the account is. I have teenagers, a few of them. Bruh, where was the camera phones? What, nobody recording this mysteriously? Nobody inside of Metcalf's tent said, let me get this phone out and let me record this just in case this goes awry. Not one teenager thought to pull out a phone. Y'all got to kind of think something's wrong with that. And I don't want to hear this, oh, everybody was scared, because I just told you on the witness stand, one of Austin Metcalf's witnesses that was in the tent that day told you they didn't pay Karmelo Anthony no mind when he had his hand in the bag. So they were not scared of what he was going to do, because they just told you he had his hand in the bag. Oh, well, we didn't think nothing local. Where we live, we safe. You ain't safe nowhere, bro. Where I'm from, if somebody got hands in bags, I'm not going to tell you to pull that out, because according to this same source, supposedly Austin Metcalf said something like his hands in his bag. What you going to do about it? Man, from where I'm from, that's one of those play foolish games, win foolish prizes. Okay, if somebody got hands in bags, pockets, I'm not going to say, look here, bro, I don't care what you got in there, but we going to go. No, first thing I'm going to say is, man, can you please step back from me? And, can you please pull your hands out your pocket? That's what I'm going to say. But they told you this on the witness stand. They had absolutely no fear of what Karmelo Anthony possibly had in his bag, because they told you that. So that's my first question. My second question is, nobody tried to intervene. If Karmelo Anthony pulled the knife out and stabbed him, nobody tried to jump him, to hold him down. Now, at this point in time, I think you're kind of justifiable to try to restrain somebody. This cat just stabbed someone. You need to get him to the authorities. Apparently, there's a whole lot more of them than it is of him. Let's see, if even half of the track team was up underneath that tent that day, that's at least 6 people. I used to run track and field. Bro, you got sprinters, you got long jumpers, you got high jumpers, you got pole vaulters, you got discus throwers, and all of these are not the same people. Yes, even though some runners, they double up what they do, you could be a sprinter and a hurdler, but no, all these sports I just named has multiple people. So at bare minimum, you got 6 people beneath this tent. One of him. Okay, I'll go with the theory. Maybe they were scared too. Already got that. But nobody was scared when they was approaching him. And when you said on the witness stand, he had something, but we didn't really think nothing of it. My third and big question is this, and this goes to the Karmelo Anthony side. Why in the world, bro, did you have a knife? See, the thing about this case, the problem is they're not asking the right questions, because this is the right question that I should be asking. These are the questions these are the questions the prosecution and the law should have been asking. What I just asked, all these people in this tent, you guys all got phones. Nobody recorded this. Why would you try this young man if his hand's in his bag by saying you don't care what's in there, you didn't think nothing of it? And Karmelo, why in the world do you have a knife in your bag at a track meet? Did you intentionally put the knife there? Have you been having some other problems? Someone you felt like you needed to be protected? What's the case? Nobody that I have seen has even asked Karmelo Anthony, why do you have a knife at school? That would be the most pertinent question I want to know. Because that's going to go into this trial. That's going to go into his mindset. That's going to go into why the knife was even there in the first place. Maybe he put it in his bag and forgot that it was there. But nobody's asking this question, and I have a feeling it's because of how this case is. But we'll get to that in a minute. Now, the statements that Karmelo Anthony made after he was apprehended is another part, a big part of this case, because of exactly what he said. One of the most discussed moments in this case involves something Anthony allegedly said after the incident. According to reporting from court, a school resource officer referred to Anthony as the alleged suspect. Anthony reportedly responded, "I'm not alleged, I did it." That statement has traveled across social media because it sounds at first glance like a confession. And in one sense, it is an admission. But legally, it does not end the case. The defense is not arguing that someone else stabbed Austin Metcalf. The defense is arguing that Anthony acted in self-defense. So the trial is not only about whether Anthony committed the act, it is about whether the law considers that act murder. That distinction matters. But still, that statement may be powerful for jurors. It shows that Karmelo Anthony acknowledging what happened soon after the stabbing. It also means the defense has a very narrow path. They are not trying to create doubt about who had the knife. They are trying to create doubt about whether Anthony's use of force was unlawful. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm getting tired of hearing people say, "Oh my God, he's a murderer, lock him up." People, I've dealt with crime in my life for years. I've been doing true crime live on podcasts now for 10 years as of May 7th. I have talked to a lot of lawyers, attorneys. I've talked to people that's committed crimes. I've read books on the psychology of murderers. I'm going to tell you this. There has never been a murderer, unless he's trying to get off with something because he's got some other cases, that has jumped up and just said, "It ain't alleged, bro. I did it. But I did it because of this." They didn't have to chase Karmelo Anthony down. He didn't fight them. He didn't argue with them. He threw his hands up in the air and said, "I did it, but I did it in self-defense." No murder do I know goes down that easy. They always have the mindset is, "I'm not going down to the man. He deserved to be stabbed. I'm not going to go to jail. I'm not cooperating." He cooperated. The other thing that is getting really passed around the internet, which is stupid, is that this was premeditated. Apparently, some folks out there don't know what premeditated murder is or what it takes. So for those who is writing these stupid comments, let me tell you what it means. A premeditated murder means that it is something that you thought out long before it took place. So you mean he had to sit up in the morning and say, "Today, I'm stabbing somebody, and I'm going to stab Austin Metcalf. Let me get my knife in the bag. It's going to rain today, according to the weatherman, so I'm going to dip myself inside his tent, and the moment he comes to me, boom, I'm just going to stab him." Premeditated, and then I'm going to run off and do what I do, ready to go. Let me make something clear. Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony didn't even know who each other were. And if they do, it's because of in the paper, because both of them were star athletes at their school. So you can't make premeditated murder on somebody you don't even know to premeditate on. And if you listen to the way the testimony goes, it was the spur of the moment. He had his hand in his bag. Now, if they want to use that as premeditation, okay, I don't know how far that's going to get you, because at this point, it looks like he was gearing up to defend himself. He knew he had his knife in his bag. So if they was going to come at him, if they kept touching him, he was just going and stab him. Well, that's what happened. Now, again, Karmelo Anthony did not fight the cops. He went on with the cops, told the cops everything that's happening. Here's my other question that I have for Karmelo, though. If this is self-defense, well, I can understand why run. So I'm not going to even ask why run. Because if it is a situation where he feels like he may get jumped or whatever the case is, and he don't want hands put on him, okay, he going to run. However, the next steps is really questionable. Why did you take the knife and throw it? Because for me, if it was self-defense, I'm going to try to stay somewhere nearby. And then when the cops come, I'm going to be like, "Yo, let me raise my hands. Here's the knife. I did it. I did it self-defense. Here's why." I'm going to go ahead and surrender myself. Because what that's showing the police is, okay, he did not intentionally do this. Something much bigger happened here than what we know. Need to get to the bottom of it. I need to get this young man detained, put in the car so I can figure out what's happening. But the moment you run, and then on top of running, you throw the knife. Again, running, I think, can be explained. But throwing the knife, I'm not too sure how people's going to buy that, right? Because it's almost like you're trying to hide and get rid of the weapon in which you use that you said was self-defense. I wish he would have never done that, because the fact that now that does aid to this case some more. However, I'll repeat again, while we're in the middle of this, nobody's ever been stabbed. Nobody should be dead. Karmelo should not have had a knife at school. Again, a question. I would think as a detective, the number one question, other than what happened, is why do you have a knife at a track meet? But schools are lackluster these days. Up until a shooting happened at my wife's alma mater and now the school that my daughter graduated at about 5 years ago, Highland High School didn't have no metal detectors and nothing like that. I understand this is a track meet. There is none out there, but I think that people follow protocol from what the school allows them to do. I could have walked in there and grabbed the boy by his neck. I could have walked in there with 3 guns. They would have never known. Students would come in there with knives and everything else. It wasn't until that shooting took place that they decided to implement detectors now. And as a parent, I have to sign in and give them my ID and get a sticker on my chest that has my picture on it to get me through the door. Then they have to buzz me in. And years before my daughter graduated, I said to my wife, I said, something's kind of stuff is going to happen up here because your school, I get it, you graduated here, but their safety protocol sucks. And that's what happened. That kind of makes me wonder, what is the protocol at the high school that Karmelo Anthony went to? Because the fact that they don't have metal detectors, so they didn't detect the knife was in his bag. I'm sure he had to go to school that day before he went to the track meet. That's usually how that works. So I kind of wonder what their protocol was. All right, let's get a little bit more into this. So the medical testimony that they had, so which today, which is day trial 3, like I said, the medical examiner testified about Austin Metcalf's fatal wound. According to reporting, the knife wound penetrated Austin's heart. The medical examiner reportedly said the injury was not survivable. That kind of testimony brings a courtroom back to the most painful truth of the case. A teenager died. A high school track meet became the place where a family's life split in two, and that must never be lost in the discussion. There is a danger in cases like this, especially when they become nationally known, because the people involved become symbols. And Austin becomes a symbol for one side. Karmelo becomes a symbol for the other. But Austin Metcalf was not a symbol first. He was a person. He was a son, a brother, a student, an athlete, a young man with a future. And that future ended. Again, my condolences to the Metcalf family. But, of course, the medical examiner is right. The stab wound that Austin Metcalf sustained is not survivable because it was directly in the heart. And I think if everybody starts examining this right, now you need to know a little bit more about this, right? How close was Metcalf to Karmelo? How, was Austin in the middle of pushing Karmelo at the time? How did Karmelo get him in the heart, directly in the heart, right? Is Karmelo right-handed or left-handed? Again, maybe these are things have been asked. I haven't seen it, but this goes into an investigation. You have to kind of know, right? If these things happen. Did Austin by force? So if Austin was pushing Karmelo at the time and Karmelo at the same time went to stab him, did the force of Austin's push redirect his chest or redirect where the knife went? All of that stuff usually is questioned because it goes to intent. If you stab somebody directly in the heart, you got to be pinpointing that, right, to do that. So it goes to intent. Now, they say that this is the biggest problem of this, is that Karmelo Anthony's attorneys decided to go the defense route. I don't think there's another route they could have went. Let me talk to you a little bit about the self-defense argument, and then we'll elaborate a little bit. Well, I don't think there's another way he could have went. So, as we know, the defense's argument rests heavily on self-defense. To understand the argument, we have to look at what the defense is trying to show. They want jurors to consider Anthony's perspective in that moment. They may argue that he was outnumbered, that he was confronted by several students, that Austin was larger than him, that Austin made physical contact first. That encounter was fast, chaotic, and frightening, and that Anthony believed he needed to defend himself. But self-defense is not automatic. A person cannot simply say they were afraid and be legally justified in using deadly force. The jury must consider whether Anthony's belief was reasonable. They must consider whether the level of force used was appropriate. They must consider whether Anthony provoked the confrontation. And they must consider whether a push or physical contact justified a knife wound to the chest. That is the hardest question in this case. If someone is pushed, when does fear become legally justified? When does a confrontation become a threat? When does self-defense become excessive force? The prosecution will likely argue that a push did not justify deadly force. The defense will likely argue that the jury cannot isolate the push from the broader situation. That is the legal storm sitting at the center of this trial. Let me just tell you this. When does a push or does a push justify deadly force? It can. If you push somebody the right way, you knock them down, they hit their head on the concrete, they could die. They hit their head on something that's behind them you don't see, they could die. Right? Whether I'm afraid or not, if you coming at me, bro, I'm going to defend myself. Same with the doofus next door to me. I already seen in his body language what he wanted to do. When you come out and your hands is up a certain way, and then when you start talking aggressively and you start throwing around slang words like partner and what you gonna do, and then your hands drop and you shift your legs back, well, right there, that's self-defense for me. Because he's about to hit me, and when he does, I'm gonna react. Because the shifting of his foot means that he was putting his best hand forward. In my case, if I'm gonna shift, I'm gonna put my right foot forward because I'm right-handed. Well, he shifted and put his best hand forward. He was ready to strike, and I yanked out my phone. Now there, what I told the cops when I called him is, I tried to de-escalate this by pulling out my phone, and thank God that it did, because if he would have touched me, I would have dropped him. That's exactly what I said to the cops. And I showed the cops the video. And the cops said to me, well, if he would have hit you, especially if you have it on tape, you would have been justified. Unfortunately, in Karmelo's case, there is no tape, right? So even the slightest move can make somebody think that you're about to threaten them. And it has been said several times that Austin Metcalf did come to his face. When you break that personal plane, that person becomes afraid. So we have to ask ourselves, when does this now turn into self-defense? Because if you're shifting and carrying on and doing all that kind of stuff, you got some intentions. He had a whole tent backing him up accordingly. And I'll just be honest with you. I don't think all of these kids that's testifying is telling the truth. I wouldn't think that if this was Karmelo's case. Okay, if Karmelo was the one that got stabbed and they all came out, because let's face the fact, teenagers lie. I've been through a whole lot of investigations at school where I've caught people in the act. And I'm just sitting there waiting, because back before they had all this stuff down, where I had to sign in and stuff, I remind you, I could just walk into the school. My daughter would come home complaining about certain people. I knew who they were. I'm sitting up on campus, biggest day, just recording stuff. And sitting in the room while they lying their teeth out. Well, we going to do this investigation. And then I'll wait till they do the investigation. Because I know how it's going to come out. Well, Mr. McClam, we did the investigation. Okay, what you get? Well, we got 4 witnesses that said Madison did A, B, C, and D, and this caused this person to do that. And I said, really? You got proof of that? Well, the witnesses was there, and these were witnesses of their peers, and these were people that was floating around the school, so I think it's pretty concrete. And I said, so their mouths are prayer book. I said, let me tell you something, bro. Here you go. I got concrete evidence right here. And he looked at me like I was stupid. Say, yeah, since you guys have this open door policy, and I am friends with the choir director, and I did have a reason to come up here to see him, I decided to record some stuff that was going on. So you tell me what part of your investigation did you catch this? And they had nothing to say. Okay, teenagers lie. And especially if it's your school or your friend, you're going to back them up. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but especially if this turns racist or racial, you're going to back them up. So I'm not so sure that everything that's being said in there is true. I'm saying the same thing. If they came out and they all said, yeah, Karmelo came up in here and he was just the perfect person. I don't know what happened. I may not believe that neither. You have to take what you hear with a grain of salt, and you have to look at body language. This is why not having this case televised is the biggest mistake. I saw the twin brother of Austin Metcalf when he was sitting here talking about what Karmelo did. And I'm sorry to tell you this, I can't wait to some of these people that's on YouTube that's been FBI analysts and that's done a lie detector tests get a hold of this and they break down body language. Because there's several, go look up on YouTube, where body language experts has broken down certain things in trials to tell you if people's lying or not. Well, I ain't trying to say that he's lying. I ain't trying to say, shame the victim's brother. But if you see that clip on YouTube, you look at him. You also Metcalf's twin brother, right? Yeah, look dead at you. So what happened? Well, Karmelo, he came in and, we asked him to leave and he wouldn't leave. Well, was he being aggressive? Yeah, he was being aggressive. You see what I'm doing there? His eyes was everywhere. When you take certain classes like I did in high school, they don't teach it anymore, and they should, but they teach you about people and relationships. The first thing they teach you is about eye contact, when to know that somebody's lying, what it means if your eyes roll up to the right, what it means they roll up to the left. They use this all the time in interrogation. I think if your eyes roll up to the right, you're trying to think of some stuff that you need to say. If your eyes roll to the left, I believe it is, you straight out creating lies. I don't buy his account either, because that is his brother. And I hate to say it, not everybody's like me. Because if my brother's in the wrong, I'm going to come out and just directly say, my brother was in the wrong. Look at the Gooding brothers. They're famous. Cuba Gooding, Omar Gooding, like both of them. Watch a lot of their movies. All respect to Omar. But Omar has a video out right now where he was doing an interview where he says that Cuba Gooding Jr. was set up for the things that he did. And when they're proving these things, and I even think some things Cuba even admitted to, but that's his brother. You don't want to see your brother go down a path. So even if Austin did something wrong, I would never expect his brother to be truthful. Never. That's why he shouldn't even testify. I don't know if he's going to, but that's why his testimony shouldn't even be there. That's why a lot of families get discounted, because they're like, well, they family, so of course they're going to take up for one another. My mama didn't raise me like that. My mom always told me, you do the crime, you do the time. She goes, only thing I'm going to do is ask the judge not to kill you. And I believe my mom would have did that. But I never got in trouble enough to find that out. So, with that said, let's move on to the controversial part of this trial, because there's a lot of racial tension that is surrounding this case. And unfortunately, folks, we have to discuss race, because it's at the heart of this, even down to the jury. So, of course, as you know, the case involves a black and white person, a black defendant, a white victim. The fact alone does not determine guilt, but it does not determine innocence. It does not tell us what happened under the tent, but it does shape how the public has reacted. And it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. From the beginning, this case has drawn racially charged commentary online. Some people have spoken about Karmelo Anthony using racist language and stereotypes. They have treated him not as an individual defendant, but as a stand-in for every racist fear they already had about black boys and violence. That must be called out. And when people describe a black teenager as an animal, a thug, or use coded language that strips him of humanity before a trial has concluded, that is not justice. That is racism. And now at that same time, there have also been ugly and racially hostile comments made in the other direction. There have been people who minimize Austin Metcalf's death because he was white. That is also wrong. And I want everybody to understand and hear my voice. That is also wrong. Austin's life mattered. His family's grief matters. No racial analysis should ever require us to downplay the death of a child. But here is the larger problem. The public conversation has often stopped being about the facts and started being about racial camps. Some people are using Austin's death to push a broader message that white Americans are under attack. Some people are using Karmelo's race to argue that the criminal justice system cannot possibly treat him fairly. Both conversations contain something powerful, but also something dangerous. Because once a case becomes a racial symbol, people stop listening. They stop looking at evidence. They stop caring about the specific human beings involved. They just look for confirmation of what they already believed. Now, what I got to say about this is that, yeah, it's very racial. There's a lot of things that people want to talk about, but they don't. I'm going to give you one. Everybody's running around saying what Karmelo did. Now, I want to put back in the stereotype that racist white America has already put on black men and boys, and it's been here for centuries. And it's playing right into this case, that we are violent, that we like confrontation, that we are vicious, that we think like animals, that the first time you piss us off, the first thing that we think about is killing someone. That's the stereotype that's put on right now. And I hate to say it to be political, but we are up underneath a racist president, and we are in Texas, which is, some people say, one of the most racist states that there is. Okay? The other thing nobody wants to talk about is this. Now, this is what I read, and I kind of saw it on the news clip, and even the news person said the same thing. I can't remember if it was after he went to jail or after his bail was lowered and Karmelo came out. It's one of those two. I can't remember which one it was. But his mother gave a press conference. And the press conference that she gave, in that she basically said that what happened to Austin Metcalf and what's happening to her son now is tragic. But her husband and her other children and herself has nothing to do with it, to please leave them alone, because they were getting death threats and things of that nature. I know some people believe that the kid is a product of the parent, which they are, but I'm going to tell you this from experience. You can raise your kid to be the most outstanding kid in all of the free world, but when that kid gets out to the world and does his or her own thing, you don't got no control over that. And I tell my kids all the time, you reflect what I do or what I've done as a parent. But when your butt grown and got out of my house, they better not bring that reflection stuff to me, because I gave you all the tools that you're supposed to have to go out here and have a good life. I've told you how to conduct yourself. I told you what to do. If you choose to do otherwise, that's on you. But that's what they want to use. So she was saying, leave us alone. They was getting death threats. Why is nobody talking about the fact that Austin Metcalf's dad was standing there trying to intimidate them? It was on a news clip, too. He was standing in his sunglasses, and according to the news clip I saw, they said he would not move or leave until he was escorted out. You tell me where that's right at. But no one's talking about that, though, right? Nobody's talking about the white man who is the father to the kid who died is now trying to intimidate the parents while standing right there on camera. No one's talking about that. I will talk about the other side that maybe black people not talking about either. Yes, the Metcalfs, according to them, was swatted. If you don't know what swatting means, that means that somebody calls the police and they report a horrible crime. Like they say something like, I heard like 18 gunshots, or somebody's killing their mama next door. And it causes the SWAT team usually to come out because of the crime that has been reported. If you say somebody's getting shot next door, you bring the SWAT team with you. Well, that uses resources. Somebody really could have been getting shot, but you calling in false reports because you mad at the way something's going and you want to take this person to jail or whatever. Happens all the time in the video game community. People get mad at a streamer and they call in a SWAT. There's been several times where people have been on stream and the police has broken their house and my freeze. And the dude's like stunned, like, dude, I'm just playing a game. What's up? That should not be happening either. Metcalf's dad should not have been standing there to intimidate them, and the Metcalf family should not be getting swatted either. You just need to let this play out in court. Now, let's talk about another troubling thing surrounding this case, and that has been the public message that reportedly used Austin Metcalf's image alongside the phrase, "Protect white Americans." This is where the racism comes from, folks. This is where the stereotypes is. Why are we putting Austin Metcalf's image there saying protect white Americans? Now, that kind of language does matter. It transforms a homicide case into a racial campaign. It suggests that the central issue is not what happened between two teenagers at a track meet, but what white people as a group are under threat. That is how tragedy gets weaponized. That is how grief gets turned into a political object. That is how a young man's death can be taken from his family and turned into a slogan. That does not honor Austin Metcalf. It exploits him. And it also poisons the atmosphere around Karmelo Anthony's trial. Because when the public conversation frames the case as black versus white, it becomes harder to trust that people are focused on law, evidence, and fairness. I think that's all I need to say about that. That's what this case is now turned into. It's white against black. Metcalf is there with their crowd with this big old sign every day. Black people for Karmelo Anthony's there every day. I'm going to tell you why I don't think this has gotten that serious yet at the end of this when it comes to African Americans, because there's a couple of things that happens around cases like this, especially when somebody feels that the black person has been done wrong. Certain things start to move. I haven't seen those things move yet. I'll tell you what those are at the end. But let's go into the next part that is very important to add to this racial situation. And I'm going to tell you the complications that this causes. The other major issue of this case is the jury. Reports say that no black jurors were selected, and they were not. The defense reportedly objected after the prosecution struck the remaining black prospective jurors. As a matter of fact, I think it's called a Braden motion, some motion. Don't quote me on that. I think it's called a Braden motion. Was filed by the defense attorney. What that motion basically says is that the prosecutor is racist. And I learned this from a lawyer watching him recap the case. He says, when you file this motion, what the defense is basically saying is that the prosecution is racist. Now, here becomes the other big problem. The judge accepted the prosecution's explanation that those prospective jurors were removed because they were educators. Legally, that may have satisfied the court at that stage, but socially and historically, people are going to have questions, and those questions are not unreasonable. In a racially charged case involving a black defendant, a white victim, and national attention, the absence of black jurors carries weight. It does not automatically mean the trial is unfair, but it does affect public confidence, and public confidence matters. The American legal system has a long history of racial imbalance, especially when black defendants are tried in cases involving white victims. That history does not decide this case, but it does explain why people are watching the jury so closely. Who sits in judgment matters. Who gets believed matters. Who gets seen as fearful versus aggressive matters. Who gets the benefit of the doubt matters. Those questions have always been shaped by race in America, and that is why this part of the case cannot be ignored. Let's talk about this all-white jury. I'm going to tell you how this can come back to bite them, and I'm going to tell you my own personal experience of why I don't trust it. First of all, let me give you the part of the report I didn't write down here, because there was two, I think, female black jurors that was struck down before all of this. And the reason why the prosecution struck them was because they supposedly told him that even if Karmelo Anthony was guilty, they could not find him guilty because he was a black man. What do I say to that? If that is true, you got to get rid of him. Because no matter what color you are, if you're sitting on this jury, you're supposed to come into this jury neutral. You're supposed to come into this jury knowing that somebody may be convicted. And you have to come into this jury knowing that you may be asked to find this person guilty on charges that can send them away for life. If you can't do any of those or all of those, regardless of your skin tone, you don't need to be on the jury. Your butt should be out of there. I totally agree. What I don't agree with is, according to an attorney that was in the case. See, I watch this every day. I think it's called Law and Crime. You guys go check out the Law and Crime channel on YouTube. They talk about this all the time. That's where this lawyer is from. He says he was sitting there when the jury selection thing was happening. And this prosecutor was just striking everybody that was black. And he was using the excuse that they were educators. And here is what the lawyer said on that show. And he's a white guy. He said, okay, you may use that once and we buy that. You may even use it twice and we say, okay. But once you start using that 3 and 4 times, there should be a question of why you keep using that to get rid of certain people. Because he wasn't using this on anybody else. Just the black people who say they were educators. And he struck them all until he had an all-white jury. Let me remind you of what the prosecution is supposed to do in a case when he or she is building a jury. They're supposed to find the jurors that they feel is going to be most sympathetic to their case. In most cases, if the defendant is black and is against a white victim, they usually don't want you to be up in there. But they use reasoning behind that. His whole reason was because they're educators. This prosecutor knew what he was doing. He wanted to have an all-white jury. Now, here's another thing I keep running into. I take comments. Here's a comment I read about that. Somebody said, this is supposed to be a jury of your peers, not race. Meaning that he didn't care if the jury is all white because it's supposed to be a jury of your peers. Peers. That reminds me of one of my favorite movies of all time. If you guys have ever seen it, you know what I'm about to talk about. It is a movie called A Time to Kill. It starred Samuel L. Jackson and Matthew McConaughey. Samuel L. Jackson was Carl. Matthew McConaughey was Jake. In this movie, Samuel Jackson comes out of the courthouse on some doors and he kills 2 white dudes because they had raped his baby. And he already knew because of the county that he was in, and he knew the sheriff and all these boys hung together and they were all racist, that these 2 boys were never going to see the inside of a jail cell. That's exactly what happened. Now, if you watch that show, since everybody's saying Karmelo Anthony did premeditation, you can say that Carl did premeditation. Because the night before they came to court, he snuck into the courtroom. He broke in the courtroom and he hid in the closet. And he waited. And the thing that he knew was going to happen, happened. Those boys went up there. Judge said, nope, free to go. No charges. And he busted that room and he pumped both of them until they was dead. In that movie, they gave Carl an all-white jury. And he looked at Jake and he said, this is supposed to be a jury of my peers. Peers. In case nobody reads the whole definition, part of the definition in Webster says peers is also somebody that's on the same rank as you. You are the same. Wasn't nobody looking like Karmelo Anthony in that jury. Now, if you go further down that, I mean, this movie fits in so well with this case. All-white jury. Carl is guilty. Never said he wasn't. He said he shot these boys because they killed his baby. Matter of fact, there was no way that Carl could come back and say, it wasn't me, because he shot them cold in front of all these witnesses that was coming out of the courtroom. Everybody saw him, even the sheriff. Even to the point to where he unintentionally injured one of the deputy sheriffs named Looney. Jake didn't know what to do. He said, man, I don't know what to do. And he said, you one of them, Jake. You got to get them to see me through your eyes. That's how you save my ass. That's exactly what he said. And if you ever seen the movie, Jake came up with this extraordinary closing that flipped everybody in the jury. Because much like I feel Karmelo Anthony's case, he was already guilty. Go watch the movie. They was taking votes, and one dude said, this end is good as dead, y'all. The whole jury already made up their mind before he even got to closing statements. That's what's dangerous about this kind of jury. The prosecution's figuring it's all-white jury. We in Texas. We in the administration that we in. We already have been told about these black people. They're aggressive. This state's going to hold on to that. Give me an all-white jury. Now, let me tell you where that comes to backfire at them at. If Karmelo Anthony is convicted, the prosecution just handed them probably a get out of jail free card. Let me explain. If Karmelo Anthony is convicted by an all-white jury and he is sent off for whatever, life, because this is what they want. They don't want anything less than life in prison for him. The first thing his attorney is going to do is he is going to issue an appeal. The second thing they're going to do is they're going to say his jury was not fair because there was no jury of his peers. There was no color in the jury box. It was all white. So they're going to say that Karmelo Anthony does not feel that he got a fair verdict because everybody in that box was white or looked white and the victim was white. Now, according to what I've heard, they said, there's white people. I guess there's an Asian woman. And they said, so there is a person of color. That's a person of color, not a black person. Now, according to this lawyer from Long Crime, go watch him. He says now the appellate courts is going to get involved. And they're most likely going to say, you know what? You're right. Let's go over the reason why this jury was all right. Because they're going to have the same question I have. So there was no more black people in Texas? Well, we know there was. But we know the problem with that is because of the fact that they didn't want black jurors. So it wasn't the fact that there wasn't more black people. It was the fact that the prosecution struck them all. If the appellate court decides that you are absolutely right, he did not have a fair trial because his jury was not colored, well, Karmelo Anthony goes free at this point and retrial happens. Now you got to redraw this over again. Sometimes racism doesn't play out in your favor. And that's going to lead into at the end when I tell you that certain things happen in the black community when people come out and they believe you innocent and those things that happen yet. Oh, those things will start to happen if they find him guilty. Just hold on. We're going to talk about that. But I want to give you my experience. Why I'm so passionate about this. Why I don't trust an all-white jury. This is my own personal experience. This is not made for TV. This is something that I actually lived a few years ago. And I think I did talk about it someplace else on another podcast episode. About 3-4 years ago, I had to go sit on jury duty. It's a local case here in Palmdale, of course. And the guy was black, and he was accused of pretty much, I guess if I remember right, he had a barbecue pit set up outside of his room. And that's not legal here to do that. I don't know if it's legal in any hotel. But supposedly they came and they found all these drugs on him and the whole nine, and it wasn't him. So I end up having to go to jury duty for that. I get picked for the jury. Every jury I go on, people I usually get picked for. And I'm usually the jury foreman in most of these cases. And this was no exception. So we get there, jury selection takes place. And after the jury is done, I look around and I'm like, there's only 2 black people in this whole case, right, in this whole box. It was me and it's an elderly black woman. Everyone else in that booth was white. Now, side note, my wife, she keeps getting haunted by this because when I sat on this particular jury, I was asked what I did for a living. And at this time, I was still doing Cena's Corner somewhat, and I was doing podcasting. This dude remembered who I was. Now, I had this same judge when I was really in my heyday. That's how many times I've done jury duty. So, 15 years ago, so I ran into the same judge. I happened to run into the same judge again 4 years later when I say what I did. He goes, oh, I remember you. You was the one that did the video game reviews, right? I'm like, yeah, that's me. He goes, now you doing podcasts? I'm like, yeah, Your Honor, things has changed, more, people's getting into more things now. My wife has to go to jury duty a couple months later, and he recognizes the last name. So when, they call her and they talk to her, the judge is like, your last name, McClam. Is your husband a video game reviewer? So she comes home telling me about that. So don't tell these judges don't remember, but doing occupation and things like that. I'm looking around. I'm like, man, let's see where this case goes. So we're not supposed to discuss the case till it's ready handed to us, right? We're not supposed to discuss anything or give, remarks or whatever. So we didn't. So they give it to us. Now I'm listening to this case. It was like step and fetch it up in here. The cops could not get their story straight. The officer that arrived first told his story, and then the person that's supposed to corroborate him, she had a whole different story, and cops just was all over the place, right? It was horrible. Nobody could keep their story straight of where the drugs came from, how they found him, what he did, and I'm sitting here going, dude, they can't even keep their story straight. Now, the prosecution knew this, and because he knew it, he went in and he was like, look, as his closing arguments, I understand the police testimony is very important, but we're going to ask you, please don't hold that against him. He already knew that their stuff was off. And then he went on to say stuff like, it shouldn't matter if whose story is what and what did what and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, it absolutely should matter. We get back to the Liberation Room, and the first day we're talking about the case in the whole nine. We take the initial vote, right? Because every jury does, let's see where everybody is. The initial vote, who's guilty, who's not. I think at that time, it was kind of, split. So we ended up talking it out. We're going over the evidence, and I'm the one saying, look, man, if we're going to send this dude away to jail for 25 years, shouldn't we make sure that the evidence that's brought forth is right? The cops couldn't even keep their story straight. There was one dude said the bag was here, the other dude said the bag was here, another cop said the bag was in his car. The bag can't be in 3 different places if you only have one bag. So some people start swaying, okay, yeah. Well, here's what it came down to. This is why I don't trust it. We were coming up on Easter weekend. And by this time, there was more people that felt that he was guilty than felt that he was innocent. And the more we started talking through it, some other people started changing their mind and saying, okay, I can see where the evidence made, let's call some evidence. Well, then the bailiff comes in and says, all right, look, you guys will have a verdict in the next hour. We're going to have to come back after Easter. So that Monday, you just getting people flip. One dude was like, oh, I can't do that. I got to be out of town with my family. And so they're like, well, there was more people in here right now that feel that he's guilty. Let's just all just vote guilty and we go home. And me and the other black lady said, we ain't doing that. And so the dude looked at me and said, why? Because he's black? And I said, how dare you insult my integrity? I said, just for your information, because people like you need to know this information, my wife is white. And if this was even her on trial, I would look at you and say, I'm not doing that. The whole reason why you want to leave is because you don't want to come back here on Monday because you want to be with your family. Another person chimed in, well, yeah, man, I don't know if I can come back here. We got to have to do something today because, man, I'm going to be too busy enjoying my Easter ham to be thinking about this. So you willing to convict somebody because of your Easter ham? No, sir. You dealing with somebody's life. This is how insignificant black life is to people. I'm telling you, I've lived it myself. I'm telling this guy, you rather send this individual to jail because you want to go get some Easter ham and you back here, you want to be on vacation? No, sir. I am not voting that. I said, I will hang this jury first. So then they go to the elderly black lady. Ma'am, you feel the same way? How you feel, guilty or innocent? And she said, I'm not decided either because we haven't 100% went through this case. She says, I think David did bring up some good points about the cops. We were just examining that. Everybody seemed to be on the same page until the bailiff came and said, hey, this is going to extend through Easter. Come back. And she said, in my good conscience, I cannot vote this young man innocent or guilty. I'll hang it too. And then God looks at me and he goes, oh, I get it, because since the judge said that you true crime podcaster, and I'm like, look, that ain't got nothing to do with this. I says, but yes, I do use my common sense from doing true crime cases. And I said, I'm going to tell you this right now. I don't care what case I've done. I'm not going to walk out of here and let you guys put somebody in jail just because of the fact that you don't want to come back. I said, but you don't got to vote guilty or not guilty. And I was a jury foreman. I said, we simply can send a note to the judge that says that we can't come to a conclusion today and we will come back on Monday. But that was the point, people. They didn't want to come back. This man's life wasn't important enough for you to come back after Easter. This young man's life wasn't important enough for you to weigh all the evidence that you've been given. This man's life means that little to you that you can put him in jail, not going over all the evidence yet, convict him for 25 years, and on your conscience will feel nothing. I can't do it. So because we told them that they were going to hang the jury, let me show you the flip-flop. I said, either we hang the jury, I said, because I'm not voting. And I said, no offense to you, ma'am. I said, I don't even need her not to vote or hang the jury because it only takes one of us to hang it. And I'm going to be that one. I said, or we do what the right and ethical thing is, and we send a note to the judge and say, Your Honor, we can't come to a conclusion today. We need to come back after the Easter break. Do you know every white person in that room turned their vote to innocent? And I looked at him and I said, a few moments ago, at least 6 of you said that he was guilty. How did you come to this conclusion of innocence now? We've been arguing this Easter situation for the past 40 minutes. And they came back and said to me, well, we just want to be done with the case. And I said, so even if this dude's guilty, you just want to be done with the case so bad, you just gonna come to, well, I guess you're gonna call it our side. I said, but it really wasn't our side because she told you she wasn't decided yet. I haven't weighed all the evidence. I'm not decided yet, but I'm willing to hang the jury to keep this guy from going to jail before we get through all that. Nope. We got family plans. We got things to do for Easter. We're going to be gone. And I said, then this is the things that you should have told the judge. I think it's some kind of breaking the law if you lie to a judge and the judge finds out. I blew the whistle on everybody. I don't know what happened to him, but I'm like, yeah, for sure. This is what happened. So we go out there. I got the verdict. Nobody's changing their mind. And judge says, jury foreman, do you have the verdict? And I stood up and I said, yep, innocent. And the prosecution couldn't believe it, right? So he throws his hand up, Your Honor, can I poll the jury? Now, polling the jury means that they go through all 12 of us and they ask, was this our correct and true verdict? And we have to say yes or no. So he polled the jury. Everybody said yes. Judge said, all right, you're innocent, free to go. Bang the gavel. Now, if you've never seen a jury before, what happens is that sometimes when you leave the courtroom, the prosecutor and the defense attorney will show up and they want to talk to the jurors and ask what happened, how did you come to your conclusion, what did you weigh? And so the defense attorney was out there and he was like, sir, can I please ask you, how did you come to the conclusion of innocence? And I said, do you want me to really tell you the truth? I said, because the other 10 people that walked out this room that does not have the same skin tone as myself or the young man you defended decided to vote him innocent because they could not fathom coming back here after Easter. And he looked at me, he said, really? I said, let me take it one step further. Over 6 of them had already said that they felt your client was guilty. When we had the discussion that me and the other black person that was on the jury did not feel comfortable with just throwing the case. We didn't feel comfortable saying guilty because we hadn't really weighed all the evidence yet. We didn't feel comfortable saying innocent for the same reason. They argued with us. And because they Easter hams and going on vacation with their families, they decided they wanted to vote all guilty And me and the other lady said that we would hang the jury before that happened. And I did give them the option that we could just send a note to the judge saying we cannot come to an agreement today, but they want it to be gone, not come back here. And the defense attorney looked at me very bewildered, and he said to me, he goes, "Sir, I want to thank you and the other lady for having the integrity to do that." He says, "Even though I am white, there's been many times I've had an all-white jury or one black person on the jury, and I already knew that my client was convicted before he went back in that room to deliberate. But what you did today saved my client 25 years." And I said to the defense attorney, I said, "I don't know if your client was innocent or not." I said, "The way that the evidence was going, he was." I says, "Because the three witnesses we had to rely on the most couldn't keep their story straight, and that's your three cops." I said, "So my vote probably would have been innocent if the evidence kept going in the way that it was going." I says, "But if your client is guilty, he got off free today because there was 10 people who didn't feel like his life was worth it enough to come back after they eat their ham and to deliberate this case properly." I said, "So if he's innocent, God bless him. If he's guilty, he escaped." And I said, "The only reason why he escaped today is because you had two people who was willing to stand up and say, we're not going to just throw him to the wolves. This is why I do not trust an all-white jury in this Karmelo Anthony case, because of the fact of what I just explained to you. Because I believe people has already walked into this jury and they already have their mind pre-made up. They already think that he's already guilty before you finish the trial. Public opinion definitely does, and I hate to say it, but all the comments most of I was reading was all white people. All of them. Because they have their picture next to their comment. Here's one of the dumbest things before we finish this case up that I heard today, that I read. And I looked at my wife, and my wife is white. Remember this. We have these conversations all the time. And I said, is this really true? Today I was watching a recap of what's going on in the trial on a different channel. And they were talking about Karmelo fearing for his life. Somebody left this comment that said, white people do not gang up on people. White people don't beat people up. Really? He went on to say, so if you're going to sit there and say that he was afraid that they was going to gang up and beat up on him, that's ridiculous, because white people don't do this. First of all, let me remind you guys how racist that is. And let me say to you what this person was saying in between the lines. White people don't gang up on people, and white people don't beat people up. Black people do. So if anybody should have been afraid that day, it should have been them. Maybe Karmelo's going to come back with a gang of black people to beat up the people in there. That's what he's saying. However, I looked at my wife and I said, that true? She said, no. I'm like, isn't there such thing as a white gang? She's like, yeah. I'm like, just checking, because I've been beat up by white people before myself. But I digress. These are the stupid comments that's going around that's making this case more racially charged than probably what it has to be. That's the same thing with that soul song with Jason Aldean. Try this in a small town. That's exactly what he was saying, what that dude was saying. We don't do these kind of things down here. Those black people be doing this. You know how racist that sound? We have problems, people everywhere, regardless of your color. If you move to an all-white community, I guarantee you somebody's beating up somebody. It happens in the black community, happens in the Hispanic community, in the community you in America. There's a problem. Chris Rock once told this joke once that said, I don't care what y'all say. If you in Watts somewhere and you on MLK Street, there's violence going down somewhere. Finish this up. Let's talk a little bit about the reaction the public is giving in the online cruelty. We kind of touched about that a little bit. Then we got a couple more points and we'll be done. So the public reaction to this case has been disturbing. There have purportedly been threats, harassment, doxing, and swatting connected to the case. Both families have had to deal with the impact of public obsession. This is what happens when true crime culture loses its humanity. People forgot that there are real families behind the headlines. People began treating legal cases as entertainment. They dig for addresses. They spread rumors. They post insults. They make threats. They turn tragedy into a performance. That is not advocacy. That is not accountability. That is cruelty wearing the mask of concern. And this is something we have to confront in the true crime space. If we are going to discuss real cases, real victims, real defendants, and real families, we have a responsibility to do it carefully. We can ask hard questions. We can criticize systems. We can examine racism. We can analyze evidence, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that people are living inside the story we are discussing. That is very true. So I wrote that down here. People, true crime, we deal with real lives, real situations. And I may be one of the hardest, most truthful ones out here because I don't care about being canceled. If it's racism, I'm calling racism. If it ain't, I'm calling it ain't. If you need to go to jail, you need to go to jail. That's what true crime should be. It should be not afraid to be able to say what you need to say and to prove your point. And if your point is wrong, somebody will tell you that it's wrong. And you have to be willing to have differences of opinions. A lot of people don't. Like I told you, I went through this for 2 years with my friend LaDonna Humphrey. All the things here centers around that I just read to you centers around integrity. The people that went after her had no integrity. Even though it was proof she didn't do anything they said. They still want to hone in, and this is what this is at. We have to be held accountable as people bringing you the true crime, as well as the people that is receiving it. Now, what does each side have to prove? This is almost like a must prove. So as this trial continues, the jury will have to consider several major questions. First, did Karmelo Anthony intentionally or knowingly cause Austin Metcalf's death? Second, was Anthony legally justified in using deadly force? Third, did Anthony provoke the confrontation? Fourth, did he reasonably believe he was in danger of serious bodily injury or death? Fifth, was the force used proportional to the threat? The prosecution does not have to prove that Austin was perfect. They do not have to prove that Austin never touched Anthony. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Anthony committed murder and was not legally justified. The defense does not have to prove Anthony was perfect either. They do not have to prove he made every good decision. They have to raise the issue of self-defense and create reasonable doubt about whether the prosecution has disproven it. That is why witnesses' testimonies is so important. That is why every word matters. That is why every second before the stabbing matters. And the case may turn on a few moments under a tent. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if you guys knew this. There was surveillance cameras that was pointed in the area. But it was so grainy that nobody can make out who did what when. If that camera worked right, or we could tell who it was, this case would already been over. It'd have been able to see, you'd be able to see what was happening. Now, from what I've heard, they said, "Oh, we can see there's a lot of commotion in the tent. We see a lot of people that's moving. That means somebody's moving around in that tent." But we don't know who. We can't prove who. We can't tell who Karmelo is from Austin. So the tape was a wash. Now, when we strip away the noise, there is a human story here. Austin Metcalf's twin brother was there. He reportedly tried to help him after the stabbing. Imagine that trauma. Imagine being a teenager and watching your brother collapse. Imagine your life dividing in two before and after in the middle of a school event. That pain is unimaginable. And on the other side, imagine being Karmelo Anthony's family. Imagine watching your son become one of the most discussed defendants in the country. Imagine seeing strangers call him names, make threats, and decide his entire life based on clips and headlines. None of this excuses what happens, but it reminds us that this case is not a game. This is not content first. It is human devastation first. So what should we be watching for as we go along in this trial and as the days gets longer? So I think as this trial moves forward, there's several things that will be important. We need to watch how the defense handles the testimony about Anthony allegedly refusing to leave the tent. We need to watch how the prosecution handles the fact that Austin made physical contact first. We need to watch whether the defense can establish that Anthony reasonably feared serious harm. We need to watch whether Anthony testifies. We need to watch the judge's instructions to the jury. And we need to watch whether the courtroom evidence matches the public narrative that has been built outside the courtroom, because those are not always the same thing. Now, I know we can't watch it, so we're going to have to rely on law and crime channels and all the other channels, CBS, everyone else is covering it. But these are the things that you should be looking for them to report on, and that should further give us a gauge of what's going on in there. So my final thoughts on this case is, this is a tragedy before it's anything else, folks. It really is a tragedy on two levels. You know, one, a young man is dead. Another young man's on trial. Two families are suffering. And the public has turned their pain into a battlefield. Right now, the Metcalf family is the only one that's feeling a loss because their son and brother and friend is no longer here. However, the tragic revelation is that it is possible that two families will be without their sons. Whether or not you say that he's guilty or not, it still does not minimize the pain that the people that did not do anything has to feel because of these actions. There is no way to discuss this case honestly without discussing race. There is also no way to discuss it honestly if race becomes a weapon used to erase facts. Both things can be true. Racism has shaped the public conversation around this case, and the evidence still matters. Karmelo Anthony deserves a fair trial. Austin Metcalf deserves justice. Those statements are not in conflict. They are the only way forward. And as this case continues, I hope we can resist the urge to turn people into symbols before we understand the evidence. I hope we can call out racism without minimizing grief. I hope we can demand justice without becoming a mob. Because when a case like this becomes more about our anger than the truth becomes harder to hear. And in the end, the courtroom has to do what the internet cannot. It has to slow down. It has to weigh evidence. It has to listen. It has to separate emotion from truth. And above all, it has to decide whether Karmelo Anthony is guilty of murder or whether the law recognizes his actions as self-defense. Until then, the most responsible thing we can do is continue to follow the evidence, continue to name the racism when we see it, and continue to remember that behind every headline are people who cannot simply log off. Now, I'll say this, I'm trying to be as sensitive as possible. I think there's more than meets the eye in this case. I don't think that Karmelo is walking to this tent and he just pulled a knife and stabbed somebody. I think that something did take place that nobody wants to say. I think there was probably some threats that was made, maybe a scuffle, whatever. But I do not believe that Karmelo Anthony walked in that tent with the intention to stab anybody. If he did, I think he'd have walked in with his hand in his backpack first and pulled a knife and start stabbing people. But I think that there's some things that is not being said truthfully by these witnesses. Now, on the other side, I'm not saying that what Karmelo Anthony did is right. Again, why did he have a knife at school? There should have been like a fist fight. We all go home that day. Somebody gets suspended from school. We wouldn't be in this trial. Why he has this knife is still puzzling to me. So I'm not saying what he did is right. I'm just telling you something does not add up 100% about this tent. And before anybody asks, I would have this same feeling if it was two black people or it was two white people, the same thing. I don't think anybody walked in that tent that day willing to hurt somebody. Now, I did tell you in close, I was going to tell you a couple of things you can look for in the African-American community when a person is 100% believed and feel like they've been 100% wrong. Mobilization begins. Reverend Al Sharpton is your first key. You start seeing him pop up. He starts talking about things. And then the next thing you know is lawyers get replaced. And then you see Ben Crumb. Ben Crumb, from Trayvon Martin down, has been central for all of these black cases that they feel like as racism has crept in and has done them unjust. You have not seen that yet. I'm not going to even mention Black Lives Matter because we know how we feel about that group. But Black lives do matter, and there's people holding those signs and say that every day. However, I'm going to tell you this. If Karmelo Anthony gets convicted of this crime with an all-white jury, you can see that mobilization. I think that's when you're going to see Al Sharpton. That's when you're going to see Ben Crump. That's when you're going to see Louis Farrakhan making statements from the Muslim pulpit. That's when you're going to start seeing Black Americans around the globe start really chiming into this, because everybody's going to feel that Karmelo Anthony did not get a fair trial when one could have been fair. And then they're going to let the courts handle it. I think at that time, you may even see lawyers change, because I do think that there'd be the firing of a lawyer. Some people saying they don't think the defense attorney is doing everything he should do. I think there's a couple of witnesses that came up from the prosecution that they didn't even cross-examine. So you probably will see lawyers change. Okay, their parents would probably be convinced to let a black lawyer take over. Most likely, Ben Crump. Okay, so I just want to let you know, since everybody said, all black people are so quick to jump. No one's jumped yet. You haven't seen the big names. Like I just said. Now, in Trayvon Martin's case, immediate. The death of George Floyd, immediate, because of what they were and how they were. Now, this one, even if they were going to move, the prosecution stuck themselves in the foot when they gave an all-white jury. And I'm saying this from a lawyer, again, the white guy that I listened to here, Law and Crime, he also said the exact same thing, that if Karmelo Anthony gets accused or gets convicted of this crime, watch out, because you're going to start to see things unfold, and he doesn't feel like it's going to work out in the best interest of the prosecution. All right, guys, thank you for joining me for this one. I know this has been a doozy of a case. I know it's been a little bit hard to talk about, but I think it's something we need to. I'll bring you guys updates as needed. This is only day 3. So I can come back and do a day 4 or 5. If anything changes, we definitely will come back and revisit this again after the case is over and after the verdict is done. I don't want to bore everybody with the same information. That's why I pick and choose what I put out here. You can find all this stuff widely available right now all over YouTube. Law and Crime channel. Go to them if you want to know and keep up what's going on. They're doing a good job over there. All right, guys. So once again, thank you for joining me. I know you have many choices in true crime and interview podcasts, and I am grateful that I am one of your choices. And I do want to say thank you, everyone who's listening to me now or in the past. Thank you for 10 great years of doing this. Always remember, you have been listening to the only 3-faceted podcast of its kind. Be good to yourself and each other. And always remember, always stay humble. An act of kindness can make someone's day. A little love and compassion can go a long way. And remember that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. I'll catch you guys on the next one.